The date was 1969. The city was Los Angeles. The set of This Is Tom Jones was built to feel like a party that had already been going for an hour. Warm lights, comfortable furniture, the kind of arrangement that made a television studio look like a drawing room where interesting people happened to have gathered. Tom Jones used it well. He was a natural host in the theatrical sense, not a manager of rooms, but a presence that made other presences feel welcome. The show had run for 2 seasons by this point. It had introduced his audience to performers they already knew, and some they had not yet fully discovered. The format was simple on paper. Tom Jones would perform, a guest would join him. They would talk between songs. They would sometimes sing together. The sophistication of the show was not in its structure. It was in who came and what happened between them when the cameras found the right angle and the room found its honesty. Johnny Cash arrived on set quietly. That was the first thing people who were there remembered. Not an entrance, not a performance, just a man who walked through a door and changed the temperature of the room without intending to. He was dressed in black. He was almost always dressed in black by then. The color had become so associated with him that it no longer read as a wardrobe choice. It read as a fact of nature. He was 47 years old. He had been performing since the early 1950s. He had recorded at Sun Studio in Memphis in the same period as Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, and Jerry Lee Lewis. He had made music that belonged to a category the industry had not yet named, something between country and rock and gospel, and a private darkness that didn't belong to any genre at all. He had also been through a decade of serious difficulty. The late 1950s and most of the 1960s had been marked by addiction, arrests, and a career that had nearly ended several times. But by 1969, Johnny Cash had come through something. His At Folsom Prison album, recorded live in a prison for actual prisoners, had been released the previous year. It had reminded the music industry and everyone listening that Cash was not a historical figure. He was a living one. He walked on to the This Is Tom Jones set. He sat down. He was quiet in the way that people who have been very loud are sometimes quiet afterward. Not withdrawn, just conserving. Tom Jones, watching him from across the set, recognized something. He didn't say what he recognized right away. He waited. He watched. He let the afternoon find its shape. When the cameras rolled, the 2 men performed together. The technical details of what they sang are less important than what happened in the room while they sang it. Johnny Cash's voice had a quality that was difficult to describe technically. It was not a conventionally beautiful voice. It was not the kind of voice that trained musicians pointed to as an example of technique. It was something else. It was a voice that sounded like it had a body behind it, like it came from a specific person in a specific place at a specific time. That specificity, the feeling that the voice was not a voice in the abstract, but the voice of this man, was what audiences had always responded to. Not the technical quality, the truth of it. Tom Jones had the same quality, not the same sound, not the same register, not remotely the same musical tradition, but the same truth behind the sound. The sense that the voice was not performing something separate from the person. The voice was the person. When they sang together, even for the relatively brief arc of a television performance, the room on set went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something unexpected is happening. Not the polite quiet of an audience that has been asked to be attentive, the involuntary quiet of people who have stopped performing their own reactions and started simply receiving. The production crew, the camera operators, the studio audience, all of them stopped for a moment because two voices were doing something that neither could have done alone. They were not the same voice. That was the extraordinary thing. They were not blending in the way that voices blend when they are harmonically similar, when one voice fills the gaps of another because the gaps are the same shape. They were distinct from each other to the point of contrast. Cash was dark and low. Tom Jones was powerful and carrying range. Cash came from country and gospel and the American South. Tom Jones came from Welsh working-class pop and the influence of American soul. They should not have fit together. They fit together. Because fit in music is not about similarity. It is about two things being equally honest. Two voices that are both genuinely true will find each other, even across the largest stylistic distance. That afternoon on the This Is Tom Jones set proved that. In a medium, television, that was very good at making things look genuine while ensuring they were carefully managed, something had briefly escaped management. The format could not contain it. The cameras could point at it. The audio could record it. But what was actually happening between those two voices in that room was not something the format had been designed to capture. Something had simply happened. After the cameras cut, Johnny Cash said something to Tom Jones. The people standing nearby heard it. He said, "A man from Wales. Who would have thought it?" He wasn't being dismissive. He was being precise. He was saying, "I did not know it was possible for a voice like that to come from a place like that." And then, after a moment, "But I suppose it makes sense. They've had their share of darkness, too." Tom Jones looked at him. He nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. Tom Jones had grown up with the knowledge that music was not separate from work. In Pontypridd, the valley where he was born and raised, men worked in the mines and the steelworks. They sang in choirs. They sang in working men's clubs. They sang because singing was one of the few things that cost nothing and belonged entirely to the person doing it. Wales has a relationship with music that is not decorative. It is not background. It is not entertainment in the trivial sense. It is a form of survival, a way of carrying weight that would otherwise become unbearable. Tom Jones had carried that understanding with him into the music industry. It had made him strange to the industry at first. He sang with too much of himself. He gave too much. Producers in London in the early 1960s were not accustomed to that. They were accustomed to performers who managed their output, who held something back, who maintained a professional distance between themselves and the song. Tom Jones did not know how to do that. That inability became his career. Johnny Cash had a different background entirely. He was from Kingsland, Arkansas, a cotton farming community. A childhood shaped by physical labor, by poverty, by the particular pressure of a southern rural upbringing in the 1930s and 1940s. He had lost a brother early. That loss had stayed in his music for the rest of his life. The darkness that audiences responded to in Johnny Cash was not manufactured. It was not a persona adopted for commercial purposes. It was a record of specific things that had happened. Both men had arrived at music from working-class poverty. Both had found in music something that the rest of their environments couldn't offer. Not escape, exactly, but transformation. A way of making the weight of a life into something that other people could recognize and receive. Neither of them had spoken about this to each other. They had only just met. But sitting across from each other on that set in Los Angeles in 1969, something was communicated anyway. Not in language, in the silence between two people who have both looked at something very dark and come through it. Music carries that kind of conversation when language can't. It moves across the distance between two lives that have nothing in common on the surface, and finds the thing underneath the surface that is the same. Tom Jones understood this the way a person understands something learned through experience rather than study. He had watched it happen in working men's clubs in Wales, where men who rarely talked about what they felt would stand in front of a microphone and give everything they had, and he was watching it happen now. In a television studio in Los Angeles, with a man from Arkansas dressed in black who moved through the room like someone who had made his peace with a great deal and was not finished yet. The show's producers had planned a certain kind of afternoon. Songs would be rehearsed, camera angles would be established. The two men would deliver what the format required. What happened instead was slightly different. Tom Jones asked Johnny Cash, before the cameras rolled, what he had been thinking about lately. Cash looked at him for a moment. "I've been thinking about how fast a man can lose himself," he said, "and how slow it is to find his way back." Tom Jones didn't respond immediately. He let that sit, because he recognized it. Not from personal experience of exactly the same thing, but from the music he had grown up with. From the men in the working men's clubs who sang with everything they had because everything they had was sometimes not much. From the specific quality of a voice that has survived something. In the years that followed, people who had been on the set that afternoon spoke about it in a particular way. Not as one of the great television moments, not with the language of spectacle. They spoke about it the way people speak about something they witnessed privately, something that was technically broadcast to millions but felt in the room like it belonged only to the people who were there. That quality of a performance that was simultaneously public and intimate was rare in any medium. It was especially rare in television, which had a way of flattening intimacy into performance and performance into product. Something had resisted that flattening that afternoon. Tom Jones spoke about Johnny Cash in later years with the particular directness he reserved for people he genuinely respected. He said, "Cash wasn't trying to impress you. He was trying to tell you something. There's a difference." He meant that as the highest possible praise. Because Tom Jones understood the difference from the inside. He had spent his whole career trying to tell people something rather than impress them. The two things could look similar from the outside. They felt entirely different from the stage. Cash was doing the same thing, in a different register, in a different musical language, with a different story behind him. But the same fundamental act. Johnny Cash died in 2003. Tom Jones had been performing for 39 years by then. He had outlasted almost everyone he had shared a stage with in the 1960s and 1970s. He spoke about Cash's death with the quietness that comes from losing someone who understood something specific and important that most people didn't. "There are people you perform with," he said once, "and people you share something with. Those are two different things." Johnny Cash was in the second category. That afternoon in Los Angeles in 1969 had established something between them that had nothing to do with a television program. It had to do with the recognition, brief, unplanned, impossible to manufacture, of two people who had found the same truth from completely different directions. The music industry of the 1960s and 1970s had genres for everything. Tom Jones was pop, or country pop, or Vegas showroom. Johnny Cash was country, or American roots, or outlaw. Neither label contained what the other label missed. And neither label came close to capturing what had happened on that set in Los Angeles when two men from opposite ends of the world sat down together and found that they had been singing about the same thing all along. The darkness that becomes music, the loss that becomes voice, the specific, irreplaceable quality of a sound that could only have come from one person in one life, carrying everything that life had given them. Johnny Cash had his version of that. Tom Jones had his. And for one afternoon in 1969, in a television studio in Los Angeles, they set those versions beside each other. The cameras captured it, but the room understood something the cameras didn't. The room understood that what it was witnessing was not a performance. It was a meeting between two men who had both looked at the same darkness from very different places and found, in music, the same way through. A man from Wales. Who would have thought it? And yet, of course,